I had shut it off in my wallet, in my pocket. Okay. So the green light tells me I'm on tape. Different approach. I was informed this morning that a number of the tapes have been put up or online now at iTunes. I had mentioned last time the whole issue about women during the scientific revolution, gender and science, and I'd read this just the other day because I was looking for some material that might deal with science, women, etc. And this came across. It's in a book, In the Balance, Themes in Global History. It's really a great book, but it doesn't follow, a chronology or area, and so it's difficult to set up a course around it because it's not particularly traditional. I was thinking about that a number of years back. In any case, I'm going to read you from this rather than just quote it, from memory. And I think we touched on it, but I think it does make a point. The men of science who contributed to profound changes in the understanding of the natural world and in humans' ability to measure and control that world were also products of their time. They did not see the world in the purely rational terms of scientific models and law. Their intellectual world was shaped by European culture and social ideals as well as scientific hypothesis. The central imagery and conceptual basis of the new science was rooted in notions of human domination over nature, which paralleled man's domination over women in human society. European women's realm of knowledge, such as midwifery, were relegated to spheres labeled heretical or non-scientific, and a large increase in the accusations of and executions for witchcraft paralleled the growth of the scientific establishment. Knowledge associated with women and practices regarded as non-scientific, such as alchemy, were underground as mechanistic rationalism assumed control over intellectual and even spiritual domains. In 17th century England, witch mania reflected the growing power of male scientific nationalism to dominate both nature and women. Francis Bacon, who made important contributions to the development of scientific methodology, was Lord Chancellor to King James I, author of a book on witchcraft entitled Demon Logic. Bacon was involved in the king's persecution of heresy and witchcraft and displayed misogynist attitudes in his writing. The utopian society that Bacon described as New Atlantis in 1624 was a masculine scientific community dedicated to possessing power and control over nature. Ideals of celibacy were upheld in universities, and monastic life was portrayed as the only way to avoid contamination by women. Hear that, guys? Celibacy, your only salvation. Thought I'd throw that out as my profound words today from the book. Bacon, though married, characterized wives and children as impediments to great enterprises. Do you ever notice that in most comic books and mythology, how the heroes have to avoid women? Superman was faster than a speeding bullet, so he got it over with. But, he had his needs there, And Batman and Robin, Batman was always behind Robin going up that rope, right? When you really, and, it's the same kind of thing. Women, as Plato said, were for bearing children, men were for sex, and that was traditional, and traditional in our mythology, interesting as well. I mean, you see it throughout the movies and throughout the films and throughout the stories. The male who is attached to the woman is Dagwood Bumstead, the bumbling idiot who can only spend his sexual time when he's not with Blondie eating super sandwiches, the Dagwood sandwich. Do you still read Dagwood and Blondie? Or it's still in the comic books, but I'm not sure which news. Yeah, I mean, it's been cut out of the comics to some. It used to be in the Argus for a while, but all right. Just a little sidelight on history. You know, Samson and Delilah. We can go on and on, but, you know, throw it out. Galileo, who never married his mistress or allowed her to live with him, though she bore him 3 children, must have felt the same way. Well, that's an assumption. Galileo, in fact, went to great lengths to ensure that the 2 daughters born of this union would trouble him for dowries or intrude on his scientific work, forcing them at the ages of 11 and 12, before the age of legal consent, to enter a convent. Galileo's son, however, was made legitimate through the good office of his benefactor, Cosimo de' Medici. Women were systematically excluded from education that would enable them to contribute to the scientific revolution as part of the social intellectual world of male scientists. The few women who did engage in scientific work were kept outside the emerging scientific establishment. Despite this, some made lasting contributions, often aided by high social position or some degree of political power through their husbands. For example, the wife of the Viceroy of Peru, who had been cured by malaria by quinine bark, introduced this practice to Spain. As naturalists and herbalists, women found medical uses for many of the plants they studied. Maria Merian trained as an artist and used her artistic skills to complement her interest in nature. She produced 6 collections of engravings that depict European plants and insects with rare accuracy and completeness. Obviously, witches were, supposed to develop the brews and the various herbal remedies for controlling people, like ecstasy. Bad commentary.
When we talk about like species of different stuff, I was gonna say
We'll deal with some of that if you're asking the question when we get to the early introduction into Darwin, but go ahead.
not only Darwin, like in every single other kingdom, in the animal kingdom, every species, the woman's always dominant.
Oh, in other species, you're saying women were dominant as such.
The whole entire animal kingdom.
The whole entire, what do we mean by dominant? I always wondered what that meant.
Like any pregnant, like anything animal you could think of, the woman is dominant.
Oh.
All species.
Well, I don't know. When I think of the lion uses his pride to go out and protect the borders, right? So, they dominant. They hunt for him. What you might say is that in all other species, men are lazy. Basically, I'm sorry. Was there a comment there?
Well, I was just going to say that basically the lion hunts for her family. While the lion sleeps all day.
Yeah. And I've been waiting to find a wife after all my wives to do that for me, but it hasn't worked out. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering how did humans become, to the earlier part of human evolution, how we became the female so low?
I think it's because the basic differences in genetically, we're naturally stronger than a woman and stuff. So that would, in the beginning, that put us in a position to hunt and
She's looking at you like she's gonna just has her mouth open like.
it's true.
Well, basically stronger, although you should have been some of the powerlifting championships I've been at and seen some of these women. There's one woman who just bench pressed 500 pounds in competition. Hi guys, can you handle 200? All right, yet again, that is of course what Plato said, that in his creation of the philosopher kings, quote unquote kings, he said women were equal, and he was quite different from the Greeks in that level. But what he did emphasize was the only difference was the physical prowess, strength, I should say, of the male, which created, in a sense, the dominance in society. But in part, and we touched on this perhaps last semester, when early civilization started, we identified that those who created civilization, in the sense the artists, the musicians, the teachers, the priests, were women at first, except some men stayed at home and they were considered the wimps, okay? They were considered the effeminate men who wanted to carry out and engage in women's tasks like teaching and being priests and being celibate and those kinds of things, because they wanted to be women like all teachers and priests wanted to be. And with that, what happened was that the roving bands of hunters came down from the plateaus and came down from the mountains and began to take over the river valley civilizations and hid the history of women dominating and that the king must die, where they sacrificed male babies, or they married a male and then killed them afterwards in sacrifice to the mother goddess. So obviously there's some study and history of this that's been going on for years. But while whatever the reasoning behind it is, or what brought it on, who knows directly.
I was just going to add that it hasn't always been that males have been in a position of power. There's been times when women were worshipped as gods because they could give birth, and that was considered God.
That's like
And that was that mother goddess imaging.
the symbol of a woman, a fertile being, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
But even going back when you said when civilization started, like back even in like ancient Sumeria and the rest of back in the Middle East, and even in India, there was these ranks starting from the top, like the priests, and going down the ladder to the lower classes, and women were all in a separate rank. They were in these classes. They were either below.
But this was after the male came into the area, is what I'm saying. Yeah, as civilization progressed, you can see that. In the early civilizations, you see the mother goddess figurine, not another earthquake, the mother goddess figurine as dominant.
Yeah.
But as we enter the civilizations somewhere around 3000, when they become more stabilized and the men are coming in to Egypt, to Sumeria, if you go down to the Egyptian Museum, you'll begin to notice that the dominant figurine, in other words, if you want to call it a god or goddess, is no longer the woman and no longer that what they call the Venus figurines, women who look like they were giving birth or were definite. They were now male figurines with enlarged phalluses. If you don't know what a phallus is, it's a penis. If you don't know what a penis is, I'm not going to use the other word for it. But that in and of itself, you know, tended to show that dominance of the male and his hang-up. So, you know, what brought it on, you know, I think I would agree with Austin in some part. It was the power of the assertion of the male in that role.
But every time a woman's been worshipped in a position of power in history, it's always been something that's just like childbirth, or it's never been something that was really, really considered powerful, like from a man's perspective. Does that make sense in a way? Like,
Yeah.
like,
Cleopatra.
well, those are exceptions of like.
Yeah, there. I mean, what did I miss? Xena? Is that what he said? Who is now on Battlestar Galactica? Boy, did she change. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
But they were never. Joan of Arc was not given chances. She had to prove herself for years and years and years before she was really given a chance to do what she did. Okay, well, she wasn't just handed the opportunity, though.
Well, it's amazing that she was given an opportunity at any point considering the period of time, yeah.
Right.
Joan of Arc.
What I'm saying is that most women have never been in a government position. There was one in
Greece, the women, as we indicated, were kept in seclusion. However, female courtesans from especially Persia were well educated, and if you're referring to Pericles, his mistress, Aspasia, certainly was an advisor to him and had a lot of power in society. But even when that power was there, the woman was covered up, and that's the point. There are a series of books by a man named Robert Graves who shows how the Bible itself covered up the dominance of the female, just like the Da Vinci Code covers up Mary Magdalene's power in the early Christian religion. And I did talk about Lilith, didn't I, in the classroom, as having been expelled from the Bible and replaced by Eve. Again, this is all speculation. We can't prove it factually.
Church's way to make women evil. That's the whole.
Well, is it the church's way or is it man's way? I wouldn't say it's the church's way. Go ahead. David wants to say something.
If we're going to take a look at the church, then we need to take a look at what they go by, and that's the Bible. Hello, the story of Esther, who saved the nation of the Jews. So, I mean, throughout the Bible, we can see that women are in powerful positions as well as men. And I'd also like to add, it's always assumed that it's the man who took away the power. What if the women gave it to us? I mean, there needs to be a series of, it has to be.
What story is this?
No, this isn't anything notable. I'm done with that, with the point of Esther. But I mean, it's always assumed that the man took it away. So I mean, it's that assumption also that de facto gives us that authority position because they look at us as authority figures. Now, I hope I don't get lynched on my way out of here.
Well, you're lucky that there aren't a lot of women in this class. Just a bunch of male feminists. As a wise ass, I would add, of course, that Esther was Jewish, and that would make the difference over strong women. Never mind. Go ahead, Austin.
What I was going to add to Tatiana's point was that when she said that women had never really been in positions of power, but in England, all throughout the, I don't know, they had a lot of queens. And so that's what a position of power.
Eleanor of Aquitaine. Yeah. Okay.
Let's go back to science. I want to go back to science.
Let me go back to, where we were. Go ahead. No, I said their role was limited and hidden. Yeah. There's no doubt that there is an emergence and more of an acceptance of women who, perhaps following David's logic, decided they didn't want to give us authority anymore. So, it's a possibility. It opens the door. Let me deal with women. Kate? Well, let me go from here. Unless you're going to talk to the camera, then it's okay. Women and the practice of medicine. Though women were barred from the formal study of medicine as they were from the study of the abstract or pure sciences, they were practitioners who delivered essential medical care. Prohibitions on women entering medical school or working as surgeons. Surgery was generally practiced by barbers. I didn't know if you were aware of that. They were not really considered doctors until after the French Revolution, or actually during it, when the surgeons became and worked within the medical field. And that barbershop pole that has the white and the red symbolized the surgery. So next time you go to a barber, be careful. You don't know what's going to happen there. You don't see those poles too often around. There used to be one outside the barbershop that was Paul's over here on Anza. He sold it recently, retired. But somebody stole it. And apparently they cost about $10,000 to replace, so he just painted one on the window. It suggested that there were enough women training and practicing in medical care that male professionals felt it necessary to seek legislation against them. Midwifery, in particular, provided an opportunity for women to circumvent the male monopoly on surgery. The midwife's role in assisting childbirth was based on experience transmitted over generations. A Swiss midwife in the 16th century perfected a new technique of cesarean section birth, a procedure in which male professionals had made virtually no changes since the birth of Julius Caesar, for whom it had been named. So cesareans were named because Julius Caesar was born through a cesarean birth. Male doctors were rarely present at births, and even elite women who might engage the services of male doctors generally had the help of a midwife at childbirth. Not until the end of the 18th century, when obstetrics became a separate branch of medicine, did male doctors begin to specialize in the care of pregnant and birthing women. And then it was mainly elite women who relied on the services of male midwives, as they were known. This expansion to include men in all aspects of medical practice was not counted by the inclusion of women practitioners. Indeed, after the 18th century, women were systematically excluded from the medical profession. Well, whatever attitudes, we just wanted to introduce that as an element. Some of it seems a bit speculative, to be honest, but what I